recording. All right, the first thing I want us to do, I just mentioned that if you're in that group where there's several have dropped out or withdrawn for various reasons, and if you're in that group, that's dropped down to 2, I'm going to combine the group of 2 with the group of 3 that's in section 8. So I think everybody is still okay in section 4. So I think it is just section 8 that one of the groups has gotten down to 2. So I'm not going to ask that you go back and redo anything. I gave Sherry and Christopher, I think it was Christopher, an option of what they could do to get their second peer review on the things that they have done without having to redo anything else. So they have options, and so we're going to be starting from task 3 with that group of 5. So you'll just need to make sure you all get together, and I'll fix that, and then I'll send you an email after I have it fixed. But I think everybody in section 4 is okay. I start out in the first of the year, and I never know how many will stick with it because it is a pretty intense program, and there's a lot of work to be done. And so usually you'll have a few that'll drop out, but we had the hurricane, and with the hurricane we had more than we usually have to drop out, and I certainly understand that. I mean, when you're worried about your home and whether you have a home and trying to get school back, that's first priority, and so that has to be your first priority as well as your health. So anyway, I try to put at least 4 or 5 in a group so that maybe by the end we won't have to redo the groups, but that didn't happen this time, so we're going to have to redo one group. I think actually about every semester that I've taught, we've had to redo one group, which always involves 2 groups because you're combining groups. All right, first of all, do you have any questions that you want either Dr. Tillman or I or both of us together to address for you?
I have one question. I noticed on the assignments on the week 5 that you posted that it says that we need a peer review for task 3, but it was my understanding we were only doing tasks 1 and 2.
Okay.
For peer reviews.
The written peer review is for all tasks 1, 2, 3, 4. You do not do a Zoom peer review conference, but you do a written peer review for task 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the APSL and task 1, 2, 3 of the APTEL. So that's a really good question. So I'm glad you asked that so we could get that cleared up. The only Zoom conference you deal with is the peer reviews of task 1 and 2 together of the APSL and task 1 of the APTEL. But you do have to do the written for 2 people in all of the tasks. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other question? That's a good question to make sure we get any of this cleared up so we don't get confused later on. All right, then we'll go to the agenda. And at any point in time, if you will please ask any questions that you have. And then I put some things, one of the things that Dr. Lamb wants us to do is actually, as if we were in class and talking about situations, he wants us to actually talk about some of the things so that we can learn from each other, and we're talking about situations that can happen. So I put that at the end, and hopefully we'll have time for you all to think about it. And I put a possible situation you could wind up dealing with, and I ask you to think in relationship to your readings as to what this principal's vision might be, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But if you'll look at your agenda about task 4, and further on down in the agenda, let me go to that. On the second page, it's a quick review of the APSL task. And what I wanted you to see to make sure you're real clear about, you do one thing and the next one builds on that, and then the next one builds on that, and then the next one builds on that. So the first task, and I think I am up to date with reading any of your tasks that you've turned in as a draft for task 1 and 2. But task 1 is establishing and researching your PLC. Task 2 was looking at data, where you as a group are going to identify a specific need or needs, and then you have to show that graphically. And then task 3, which is what you've been working on recently, is where you're actually doing your research to find best practices that you can actually use in your school, something that your teachers either know how to do and maybe they've not been using it, or it may be a new practice, or it may be something they did years ago and they put it aside and they haven't been using it. And we remind you that you need 3 online tools and you need 5 other resources that address the needs that you've identified. And then task 4 is your action plan. And that's the one we're going to be working on. And this is where you're going to develop a plan that you're going to say you're going to implement the strategies to prove the need or needs that you've identified. So just make sure you realize that what you start out with in your PLC in the very first, you're actually building on each time. And so that's the reason that it's important that you get those to where you feel really good about them. So that when you get all of them completed and you get ready to put it together, it is very seamless. Basically, all you'll do is take the bibliographic data and move it to the very end and make one bibliography reference sheet that you put at the end, and then you'll label all of your appendices to follow in the appropriate order. So that's something that you need to be thinking about, but it will not take you much time if each one of the tasks is in good shape. If your school profile is in good shape, you know, it'll just be taking out those few pieces and cutting and pasting. You may have to re-alphabetize your bibliography, because most likely you will, because you use different things in different places. All right, let's look at task 4 now that we've reviewed those others. For this task, you are going to lead your school PLC in researching and developing an action plan that's going to address the need that you identified in task 2. And in developing your action plan, you're to lead your PLC using some type of electronic narrated presentation. So don't forget that it says you're to use some type of electronic and then narrated presentation. So, you know, if you stop and think about it, what's an electronic narrated presentation you could use?
PowerPoint.
PowerPoint is right. There's others, but, you know, make sure that you use something that you feel comfortable with, that we don't have to log into for Google Docs or something like that. Make sure it's something we can actually open, because that is one of the things that I'm running into. Sometimes I'm having trouble opening zip files that people have put some things in for us to review. And for some reason, it will get me to a point and then it says cannot be opened. So, you know, just make sure when it gets to that evaluator, you don't want them to run into these issues. We can run into these issues and tell you that we can't open them, and then you need to fix them. But when it gets to that evaluator, you don't want to take up very much of their time. You don't want them to have to send it back to you. They can, and yes, if you fix it, they'll regrade it. That's not the issue. But it's just they have so many to do because everybody's is coming in at the same time. And it's especially true about the APTEL, the second part, because the group of students that are taking 5 semesters to complete the entire master's program, theirs come in at the same time yours do, except they're doing the APSL, and it's coming in at the same time of the APTEL for you all. So it has so many to do, you just really need to make sure it's very easy. All right.
Dr. Todd, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
When it says electronic narrated, do you just mean that we're presenting it to our PLC and talking about it, or do we also need to record ourselves talking and attach that?
Mainly it's that you have done your, whether it's PowerPoint or whatever, and then you discuss it. you sort of narrate it when you're making the presentation.
So it's okay to just attach the PowerPoint, and it doesn't have, you don't have to have also a video of us talking and
now, if you want to do that to have evidence of it, you can do that and submit it as a YouTube. But it just says electronic narrated presentation.
Okay.
So your agenda, your PowerPoint, and you might want to include your script that you used with what you discussed with your PowerPoint. You know, a lot of times when I was using PowerPoint in a classroom or with my faculty, there's a notes page at the bottom. And I would just put notes in that I wanted to make sure. So that's where your narrated part could come in.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Tillman, is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, that is what I was going to suggest, because when they put it in their competencies, they can mention that they use the notes function of the PowerPoint, which gives them a little different look at PowerPoint. And if you've never used the notes, you need to, because it's great. You try to load too much on the slide so that you remember what to say, when in fact, if you put less on the slide and use the notes, you look better, you look more knowledgeable, and people aren't going crazy trying to read all that little print on the slide. So it's a great feature.
Okay. Any other questions so far? All right, the next part, I just bulleted the things that you need to have in there, and I took it straight off of the information in the description, and I also double checked it with the rubric. So the first part of it, and again, here is not where you're using creativity again. You want to follow this so that your reader can look at this and say, oh, they've addressed the importance of the action plan. They've addressed the alignment with student learning objectives. They've addressed, and the short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals can be done in a chart. And I would encourage you to think about ways to get this information so that it's very visual and easy to follow. So I have seen students in the past, the first column would be short-term goals. The second column would be mid-term goals, and the third column would be long-term goals. And when they listed the goals, then they would put notations as to who is going to be responsible for it, and that's the next part of the things that have to be included. What's the specific activities that's going to go with those goals, and how are you going to know that you've been successful? You know, just saying you're going to do something and doing it doesn't mean you're going to be successful. So how are you going to know that you've been successful? It can be some type of formative assessment that you've got written into your plan. It can be, you know, the students, if they're in younger grades and you're listening for them to read, and part of the problem is they don't have a phonetic background, and you can check it off when you hear them pronouncing things correctly. You know, it's whatever you and your group decides the way you're going to assess this. And then who's going to do what? Who is responsible for doing these various strategies? Is it going to be the classroom teachers? Is the principal going to follow up by looking for these activities in the classrooms when they visit? If you have a curriculum person in your school, are they going to be helping train the teachers with all of these different strategies as well as you? So who's going to do what? And then the last part is your assessment criteria, both the formative and summative. Now, sometimes you probably think that your summative is going to be your end of course or end of grade test or whatever assessment your school is using. And your formative is going to be your ongoing assessment. So, you know, you just have to think through and figure out all of those. Then once you've developed this plan, you present it to your school administration. And in your narrative, you discuss your role as the leader. You talk about the degree of collaboration that you had in your PLC, And you talk about shared governance and delegated responsibilities in this group as you developed what you were going to do. This action plan doesn't have to be extensively long. I recommend that you make it concise but informative. And you may think those are not easily connected, but you can present the information and then explain it clearly and give enough information that your faculty knows what to do, as well as anybody who's reading it. And they also want you to have graphic highlights in this action plan. And Lori, I see you have a question. Yes, ma'am.
This is regarding the last part, the assessment. I know ultimately the assessment, the summative assessment, will be the end of grade test in North Carolina for mine. However, we're not going to be getting results until June or July this year because of the new test.
That's right.
So instead, I mean, wouldn't you recommend me come up with some other sort of formative and summative assessments to see if this, because otherwise I'm never going to know. I mean, it's like I'm going to finish the program and I will never be able to, I mean, I'll know eventually, but I won't be able to tell anybody whether or not it worked or not.
Well, and see, a lot of the times you're not going to know whether it works or not by the time the semester's over. You just try to do as much as you can, but your formative assessments should be something that will give you a picture of whether it is working or not.
Okay. So it is okay for because that's what I would like for it to be, is for the summative to be if we improved on that end of grade test by all the strategies that we used throughout the year. So it's okay for that to be the summative.
And that can be your summative. Just make sure your formative is giving you some immediate feedback.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And that's a good question. Dr. Tillman, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I think that's one of the things that really is hard for students to understand. What you're really looking at here, I always encourage them to put it in the format of the school improvement plan that they have at their school, because in the end, that's where it should end up if you're really doing it to be doing it. If you're doing it just to finish this course, it really doesn't matter. But if you're really doing it to see what happens and improve instruction in your school, you need to do it in the format of your school improvement plan.
All right, any other questions so far? All right, all of that is prompt 1. And then the second prompt of task 4 is where you will share your action plan with the administration, and you schedule a meeting between the PLC and the administrative team to discuss possible implementation. And these are the following things that should be in your discussion: building efficacy, strategies for sustained growth, issues concerning diversity, what resources are you going to be able to use and do you need, and then a shared vision of learning, establishing that shared vision of learning. So that's what you're going to be in prompt 2 of this task. That's what you're going to be discussing when you discuss this with your PLC and your administrative team. Now, to be proficient, you have to demonstrate knowledge of the steps in developing an action plan and demonstrate that knowledge and understanding related to a systematic investigation of needs and solutions that's essential as demonstrated through the application of assigned technologies. Don't forget that piece. That's where you need to reference your online tools as well as other teaching strategies for improvement, and work with the PLC and where you've developed a complete action plan as outlined and shared with the school leadership team. Now, to be accomplished, you have to have one additional piece, and that is you actually implement what you've come up with. So, you know, in order to pass this, you don't have to actually implement it. But if you want the highest grade, it says you have to begin implementation of it. So that's one of the better things about doing this in the early part of the semester, because you actually have time to get it implemented and get it started. So those are the things that have to be done. And it says that you have to convincingly meet the learning needs of the students. Well, now, to me, for you to convince us, you've got to have some kind of data. It's not that just that you're doing it and implementing it, but that's where your formative data would come from. You would include that so that your reviewer or evaluator would actually know you have implemented it, and this is the results that you're seeing. And whether or not that was different from what you saw previously, maybe you didn't see as much growth the first part, but when you began these you just got to convince us that it's working with some actual data. All right, anything else related to that task 4 or any of the previous tasks, or any questions that you've run into something? Lori?
I'm sorry, I just have a lot of questions tonight.
That's okay.
I know we're attaching our, and this is about task 3.
Okay.
I know we're attaching our annotated bibliography in the appendix.
Right.
But my question is, I can't really find APA style if the annotated bibliography should have its own title page and all that sort of thing, or is that just for the narrative for task 3? I'm trying to just get it in the right format.
All right. You know, an annotated bibliography is it's the information about the article, and it's roughly 150 words where you describe what you've read. Mm-hmm. and it has to be in alphabetical order. Mm-hmm. What you need to be doing when you're looking at that is I would do it like I would do anything else. Maybe it's Appendix C, and I would put Appendix C, and then I would put a / annotated bibliography, mm-hmm. and then I would just attach it. I don't think you need a separate title page. I think when you're thinking about putting this whole thing together, your title page is at the very first, and then you might have a table of contents if you choose to do that, and then the next part would be your school profile, immediately right. Followed by task 1, task 2, task 3, task 4, task 5, bibliography, and then appendix all the way through A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever your system is that you've chosen and what APA recommends.
So I will be attaching a link to my annotated bibliography that's also another Word document, but it can just say annotated bibliography at the top and then start. It doesn't have to have an introduction and all that kind of stuff. It's just the annotated bibliography, right?
It is just the annotated bibliography, okay. Because your narrative is going to take the information and put it in paper form.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You actually have 2 sets of information using the same things, but your narrative is going to take the information and put it like a regular research paper where it flows from one idea to the next, and you can blend references together in one paragraph. It doesn't have to go from this reference to this reference to this reference in your narrative. It does have to go that way in your annotated bibliography.
Right. But in my narrative, I'm really talking about kind of themes that came out of all of those things, and so I'll just be writing and referencing back to those articles like I would in a regular research paper.
Absolutely. That's all it is.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And actually, that's really all a literature review is. And if you ever think about getting your dissertation, you're going to spend a lot of time getting your literature review. So whatever your topic is, you will spend a tremendous amount of time and effort going through different resources and seeing what fits best with the idea that you have. But you want a really solid one. So this is just an introduction to what a literature review would look like. You will have, if you do a dissertation, you will have many references, not 5 and 3. So that's just to get you started. Okay, anything else that anybody has a question about? Dr. Tillman, you have anything to add?
The only thing I would say is do think about themes. And of course, the online is an obvious theme. And then if you're doing like trying to work with getting level 1, 2s, and 3s on up, then maybe for remediation, for basic content, and then for advanced learners, themes, ways of approaching the data rather than just saying this person says this and this strategy is that, and that's not a literature review. It really does have to run with themes.
And it needs to flow like any good English paper would. It needs to flow from one idea to the next. So, all right, any other questions? All right, one of the things that you're reading this week about is leadership styles. And I'm actually going to jump around on my agenda again. I want you to look to, I guess it's the bottom of page 3. And it's talking about leadership. And I mentioned that in your reading this week, you're given some information related to leadership and systems theory. And so what I have done is taken and highlighted some of the pieces for you to have to get it in your brain as you're thinking about working with this. Your book talks about 3 ways of looking at schools. Looking at them as machines, as organisms, and as brains. And when it's talking about machines, it's thinking about the scientific management era. So it goes back and it talks about this is some of the characteristics of those schools. Efficiency and highly structured tasks, and they characterize much of the organization's daily operation. They may be unaware of or be unresponsive to the changing needs of the internal and external environments. It's more of a bureaucratic hierarchy. It's policy-driven, and in some situations, it may stifle the initiative and creativity of the members of the organization. And many people look at these schools as being managed rather than led. So then the next one they talked about was looking at the school as an organism. In other words, it exhibits growth and adaptive qualities. And some of the things that you would particularly look at and look for in those schools is centered on interdependence and collaboration. You emphasize individuality, uniqueness, and self-renewal. You're responsive. It's an open organization, and it meets the changing needs of the internal and external environments. And the principals in those schools serve as facilitators with a shared mission that unites organizational members through purposeful commitment. And then the third way of looking at schools was to look at schools as brains. They emphasize reflective problem-finding approaches for the improvement of current conditions and practices. Now, as you're hearing these discussion about what the schools are, think about your own school. But for the school as a brain, you're both the rationale and intuitive dimensions of problem solving are coming into play. Knowledge and power are widely dispersed throughout the organization. It's not with one individual or a group of individuals. The school acts as a community more so than in segments and little groups. Knowledge is shared, it's stored, and it's generated, all 3. Principals serve as facilitators, and they enable the free flow of communication and exchange of ideas. And they set forth conditions that foster the empowerment of others. So those are the 3 types of looking at schools that this particular set of authors chose to look at. Now, you can actually find these same things written by other authors, and they'll be called something different, but the descriptions are going to be almost identical. So I don't think it really matters exactly what they're called. I just use the language your textbook uses, and it's to let you see a progression of the way that things in schools have changed over the years. In all honesty, I don't think that any school is going to be in either one of those categories. I think there's going to be some of each of those categories in every school. It would be a very rare school that would be able to, you could say, okay, this school is this, or this school is this, or this school is this. I think you're going to find bits and pieces of all of those characteristics in your schools. So, like I said, it would be a very rare school that you would say, okay, I know this school is definitely operating as a brain, or I know that this school is definitely operating as an organism, or this one's still acting like the machines. They're back in the machine age, in the when everything was being done manufacturing wise. So just know that the names can be different in different writers' narrative, but it's still the same idea. The other thing I wanted to talk briefly about, and then we're going to go back to the case study for you to think about. Your textbook also presents 2 leadership perspectives. Now, there's some others mentioned in other chapters, but in this particular early part of the book, it talks about transactional leadership and transformational leadership. And transactional leadership is where it's a power base of rewards and punishment. Now, think about your school. How many of your principals and your teachers have behavior things set up on rewards and punishments? Probably a good majority of your schools have that. Is there anything wrong with it? No. In some situations, it's needed to get to another step. But that's just what they're calling a transactional school. They endeavor to gain the cooperation of followers on an exchange basis. They share information. Leadership is viewed as a function of the organizational position. Now, when I say that, what am I saying? What am I really saying there? And what's the authors really telling you? The function of the position, of the organizational position.
Maybe that your title helps determine your position in the leadership, or people's idea of who the leader is based on your title, as opposed to who's really making the whole thing work.
That's exactly right.
Chain of command.
Because you're the, Ms. Sheila, did you have something to add?
I just said like a chain of command.
That's exactly right. Because the principal has the job principal, then there's certain roles and duties that you expect that principal to do, and they have that leadership role because of the title that they have. And then another transactional piece is to react to presented problems by orchestrating people and tasks to accomplish stated goals. Well, every school has goals, and those goals are generally for improvement. So you're going to be working with people, and you're going to try to get them to improve the scores, usually is what it is, or it could be another problem. It could be something as simple as parents letting their children off in a way that's unsafe. And you've got to come up with an answer and work together to make sure that everybody gets there safely. So, that's what they talk about under transactional. Well, transformational, they go ahead and they talk about collaboration. You are trying to make sure that everybody is being collaborative and interdependent as they work toward a purpose that they're deeply committed to. So you have to think about that. Is your school set up where everybody in the school is deeply committed to a certain purpose, and do they work together, and are they interdependent with each other? It's based on influence, and it's accomplished when leaders delegate and surrender power over people and events in order to achieve power over accomplishments and goal achievement. So, in other words, if this group of teachers is strong in something, the principal doesn't have to be. They relinquish that power to that other group of teachers. And then they serve as the leaders in that particular, whatever it is, function or piece. And then they went ahead and described 4 important characteristics of transformational leaders. First of all, they're educative. And what they mean by that is they help the organization to learn. They are teachers just like you are teachers in a classroom. And I will go back and say when I became a principal, I don't know that I had an idea of exactly what my role was going to be. I mean, I knew what I thought other principals were, and the ones I'd worked for. But it came to my mind that really I was still a teacher, except the ones I was influencing the most were not the children, it was the teachers. I was the teacher of the teachers. And at my school, we needed to be headed in a direction instead of everybody being in different directions. So when we were going through our school improvement plan, we came up with goals that we could all live with and items that we could do. And we actually talked about them. And then I realized that there was some pieces that my staff didn't have the information on. They didn't know how to do them. And at least some of them were honest enough to tell me that. So for some things, the county was doing training, and I actually attended the training with my teachers that the training involved that age group. And then some things that my whole school needed to know how to do, I bought the ASCD professional development package, and then I went through and trained the teachers using the ASCD materials. So I indeed was a teacher of teachers, and I was giving them a group of strategies that they could work toward that everybody in that school knew how to do. And so that's where the educative part comes from. The next one is critical. They examine the current conditions and question their appropriateness for all individuals. Now, how many times have you looked at your school scores and thought, okay, what's this really telling me? Is this really telling me what my children know or not? So you're actually looking at everything you're doing, and you're questioning whether what you're doing is getting the effect that you want it to have. And if it's not, that's what you need to change. I used to always tell my teachers that when the central office, and this was definitely before I worked at the central office, but I used to always tell them, when the central office tells you something you need to be doing, don't throw away the stuff that's always worked for you. You know what strategies have worked. You know what strategies haven't worked. You throw away the ones that haven't worked, and you put in the new ones that they want you to try, and you put them in the ones that don't work for you. Every one of you is going to have strategies that will work better for you than it will for other people, because part of what makes you the teacher you are is your personality and the way you react to children and the way you act to the people in your school. So if what you're doing is not getting the desired results, then that's what you throw away, and that's where you try the new stuff that's being presented to you. I underlined and bolded the next one. And the reason I did that is because it seems we're having more difficulty finding ethical people in every way of life. And yet that's one of the most important things that we as school people can be doing, is providing ethical leadership. You know, our children need to know that we're telling them the truth. And when I say children, I'm talking about students from pre-K all the way through college. They need to know that we're not making stuff up, and if we are making it up, we need to own up to the fact that we're making the answers up as we go, because there's not an answer. But we need to be ethical. There's a certain way we treat people. When we use other people's information, we give them credit for it. I didn't put the actual reference, but I did put this information came out of your textbook, and I put the name of the textbook. It didn't come directly out of my head, and so I'm referencing where the information came from. So you have to treat people the way you want to be treated as well. And I think that's part of being an ethical principal. You don't talk about other people because you've got to work with everybody in your school. You don't become cliquish. I will tell you that as a principal and school administrator, they're often two of the loneliest jobs you'll ever have in your life because you can't trust everybody. Many people want to be your buddies because they want to get the information from you, but they don't keep it there. They run and talk to everybody in the school and they tell their version of it. They don't tell what you said. So many times your best friend will not be in your school. It will be someone that you trust that will be maybe another school. It could be somebody at the central office that you know really well that you think, okay, I can tell them the truth and I can get them to help me. You have got to figure out who those honest people are and who those people are that will keep information. You need somebody you can share information with, but at the same time, you have to be careful about who that is. A lot of people want to become your best friend because they want to be able to run to their buddies and say, okay, this is what the principal said, or this is what the superintendent said, and this is what, well, when it gets back to you, you don't even recognize what you just heard because that's not what you did. So if I can help you be an administrator by encouraging you to think about that and realize that your best friend may not always be your best friend, you will be much more successful, and you do need somebody you can trust, but make sure you are careful about who you trust, especially with any kind of information that is considered confidential or anything that's going on in your school that could blow up. Usually if you're a principal, you're going to have a superintendent or assistant superintendent that you can trust with everything. And, those people should be very ethical, just like you should be. So, when I was a principal, I would call my superintendent and I'd say, giving you a heads up, this parent is really mad at us. And this is what we did. Just wanted you to know, because I'm sure you're going to get a telephone call. I gave them your number. And so, you need that kind of relationship. Your parents don't need to think you're afraid for them to call that central office. Because if you give that impression, then you've given away your power. They can walk all over you. And that is not the way you run a school. You need to be in control, you need to be professional, and you need to be confidential. And so what if they're mad at you? Call the superintendent or whoever's name you give them and their number and tell them what's going on. Most of the time, they're going to agree with you and they'll defend you to the hilt. But you do need to have that relationship there. But I cannot encourage enough about being ethical and thinking about yourself, thinking about democratic values and moral relationships. And moral relationships are not just that you can't have a relationship with a student. There's a lot more to being moral than just that you can't have a teacher-student personal relationship, especially at the high school level, because that's usually where the problems are. And I will tell you, as a superintendent who has had to go through one of those situations with one of my teachers, it's always the teacher you least expect. It is always a teacher that everybody respects and sees one side, and then this happens. And nobody wants to believe the student. And that is one of the worst situations you can ever be in. And it is not funny. And the best thing you can do is very quickly call the police and get it out of your hands and let somebody else handle it and knows what they're doing. And then you do crowd control. You protect the student that's making the complaint. You protect that student because that's your job. You're there in loco parentis, and you'll know what that means later on, but it means in the place of the parent, because they're not always going to be there, especially at the high school level, because students don't want their parents there at the high school level. It's still okay when they're elementary, and it's semi-okay when they're at middle school. And parents have to be real, I guess, figure out new ways of doing things to continue to be involved at the high school level, because most of the time the students don't want them there unless it's to see a ball game or something. But just make sure that you do the right thing and you look after those students whenever these situations come up. They're not fun. They're absolutely awful. And it's hard on the school. It's hard on the families involved. It's especially hard on the teacher's family that's guilty, that nobody had a clue that it would happen. And then the last thing is transformative. The leadership is aimed towards social change through elevation of human consciousness. So those are some things. My phone went on and was going to define consciousness for me because I used it to look at the time. So now that I've went through all of that, I want us to go back to this case study, which I had here for us to discuss. You're a middle school principal. You have an activity fund, and it has proved useful for your school's operation, and it benefits the children. Many of the extras that you provide to your teachers are paid for from this account. Field trips to places that charge admission, special event performances, gifts for outstanding students and teachers, transportation costs for some interscholastic events, clothing for children in need have been provided by this fund. In the past, you've always had an adequate amount of money in this activity fund. Currently, your middle school has an enrollment of 925 students, most of them from very modest homes, and about 65% of your students receive free or reduced price lunch. Many participate in the breakfast program. The school system has decided that they're going to move away from allowing you to sell snack foods and soft drinks. Now, this is where most of your money for the activity fund has been coming from. Some of the children avoid the regular lunch and fill up on snack foods with what money they have. With increasing concern about poor diets and obesity of young people, feelings about getting rid of the temptation of snack foods and sugary soft drinks are running high. It's clear that the Central Office Administration and School Board are going to discontinue the practice in all the schools. Now, one little quick piece to say here. I want all of you to realize who you work for. You do not work for the principal. You do not work for the superintendent. You work for the school board. They're the ones who issue you the contract. So if they pass something, you better do what they say, as well as your principal and your superintendent. And usually your superintendent's job is to get the information out to the schools that the school board passes so that everybody knows what you're supposed to be doing. Your activity fund will not survive once this occurs, because 85% of the money in the activity fund comes from sale of snack foods and soft drinks. Your students need the extras that the fund provides. But using snack food and soft drink sales isn't good for your students and isn't really a good source for your fund. All right, what are the issues that you can identify in this situation?
Shortage of money.
Shortages of money is one issue.
Not selling the snack food and soft drinks.
All right, when you sell the snack food and the soft drinks, what message is that sending to your children?
Healthy foods aren't important.
That's right.
Well, my first instinct would be, could you still use the machines but put healthy snacks and water and juice in there and still make money? But uh, um, but then they're healthier snacks, and so you're not sending a double message kind of thing.
That's right. The children should be eating lunch. What's another way you can curtail all that? What can you do to still leave them there, put healthier foods and drinks in there?
Don't turn them on until after lunch.
That's right. And that is really in North Carolina, and I'm sure it's the same way in South Carolina and Virginia too. That is really the issue. If you're a Southern Association school, you are not to sell anything until after the last lunch is sold. And that goes back to the legislation that was passed when your school started with the school food service product. So those are all things that you can do. So what can you do if you moved it, you provided good snacks, but you're still not getting the funds you used to get? What can you do? Where might you find some more money?
I think I'd probably talk to the PTA first.
Okay.
And see if maybe they could do a fundraiser, or if they have funds available to help supplement, since I wasn't going to get as much money anymore.
Right. What about some of the rest of you? What might be some other things you could do?
We might have like a hot dog or a barbecue sale like for the faculty.
Okay. I know some schools have done this. They've had, you can wear jeans on Friday and dress down if you pay for it. You know, and that's usually for the faculty, not the teacher, not the students. So, you know, that's a little bit of a way to get a little money, because a lot of teachers would really like to dress down, or not just teachers, but the whole staff would like to dress down, and they'd be happy to pay $1 once in a while to do that.
We've had games at my schools too, where they do like, at Valentine's Day, the kids can buy little dollar grams to send to other kids, or at Christmas time they can do stuff and make stuff and send it to other kids. And we even had a time where at a school that I worked at, where the autistic kids did stuff, made stuff, and like put out on the tables in like the cafeteria and stuff like that, and people were able to purchase it, or you know.
All right. So you all have got some good ideas, and so those are some things. There's a couple other things you can do depending on the area you're living in. And I don't know, you'd have to think about whether it work for your schools or not. You could ask businesses to help because you've got the issues. If you usually tell them what the money's going for, and you make sure you use it exactly the way that you asked for it, and that's what you should do. That's the ethical part. If you ask for money for field trips, that's the only way that money should be spent. A lot of times they'll help you. The other thing is to send out to parents who don't participate in the PTA by just sending to all parents to say, this is the problem we're having. And I suspect that over the last few years, this has been happening more and more, and you've been having to ask your parents for providing things like paper and pencils and colored markers and anything that's a school supply, because you're getting almost no money for materials and supplies in your schools. Or at least that's what's happening in a lot of the rural areas, because they're spending the money on personnel that they might have at one point in time had available for materials and supplies, and they have very little for that anymore. So we've already talked about where you can get extra funds. With limited funds available, how will you get your faculty to prioritize the needs for the extras that you've been able to provide, but will most likely not be able to provide nearly as much in the next few years as in the past? So what are you going to do to get your faculty all on board and come up with okay, this is when we get any money in, this is how we're going to spend it on our students. And it's going to be for It's going to be for field trips. It's going to be for clothing for children who need it. It's going to be for school supplies. You know, how are you going to get them all on board and come up with your list?
Be good to show past, if you had your office staff come up with how money was spent in the previous year to get them to look to see where the greatest need was. And then maybe collectively, I guess, in an effort to be more transparent with the staff.
And probably your principal was doing this and didn't ever share the amounts, or, you know, and maybe the teachers said, well, we got this, but they didn't know where the money was coming from. So you're exactly right, Lisa. This is the place where we are going to share and say, okay, I've been able to provide these, but I can't do that anymore. So I think we might need to just look for one or two things, and you tell me what is the most important to you. And how could they get that information from the teachers, and the teachers all feel that they had a part in it? Survey. That's right. That's a very quick and easy way to do it. And it can be an anonymous survey. You know, it can be whatever type of information that you need. Now, the next question is going to go back to some of those things I mentioned earlier. As you look at the information you've been provided, what's the vision of the principal concerning his or her school? What's the vision of this particular principal that from the actions that this principal has taken? What is it they want their schools to be able to do?
To provide that extras that they've been providing for, with the snack money, with the sale of the profits from the snack and food, soft drink.
All right. Would you think that that particular principal is a very student-oriented person, and that he sees the needs that a lot of parents are not able to provide, or she sees the needs, and they've made it their vision and their purpose is to make sure their children in their school are given opportunities to do things they might not ever have the opportunity to do. And then I ask you, is this vision a mixed message? And what I'm going back to is what we discussed earlier. We're talking about something that was not healthy for children. We've used that to do something that was very good for children. So is that a mixed message?
In a way, it is. I think it's a mixed message. I think a lot of times, in order for there to be a greater good, you look at some things that you have to do that maybe aren't exactly the way you would choose for them to be done. I liked Lori's idea. I thought that was a great way to think about snacks that were healthy. But I do think it does send a mixed message.
Okay, and this is just the kind of thing that I'm using and plan to use a few more throughout when we're not having a lot of tasks that we just have to spend a lot of time on, because I'm trying to get you to think like a principal. That's my purpose. And I want you to look at the big picture and not just look at it from your particular perspective. I want you to look at the questions that I put down for you to think about. We're not going to go over these, but I want you to think about these. In most situations, this is on the very last page. In most situations, a leader will have to employ more than one type of leadership, and the way a school operates will also not be one of the examples given. Most schools and leaders combine various ways of operating and leading a school. Many times, the type of leadership used depends on the way the faculty actually operates. I want you to think about your school situation, and I'm not going to ask you to do anything but think about it and figure it out in your own mind. Where do you see your school operation, and where do you see your principal's leadership style? Why do you believe the school operates as it does, and is your principal's leadership style effective? And if the principal is not the most effective person, it could be an assistant principal who works with certain topics. One may be better at doing something than another. And then the other things to think about is, imagine that you are new to your school. What do you see as a new employee? If you've been at your school for a while, this will make you reflect on your own school and how it's changed over the years. Will a new employee see the school the same way you see it? And why would they or why would they not see it that way? And then looking at your school data as you have been, imagine you're assigned as the new principal of your school. What will your first focus be, and what type leadership style or combination of styles will you have to employ to move your school forward and decrease the learning gaps among various groups? And those are just thought questions for you. And again, it goes with your reading material. The reading material actually goes with you, the background for you setting up your action plan. So do you have any other questions or anything else that you need to talk about tonight? All right, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and I'm going to end our meeting, and then I will record this, and I did record it. I will stop the recording, and then I will turn it into a YouTube for those who were not able to join us. And for those of you who did join us, thank you very much. And Dr. Tillman, joining.
Dr. Todd.
Yes.
I think I missed the first part, but for this week for task 3, when we do our annotated bibliography and all this with that, we're supposed to present that to our PLC, correct?
You present the information. You present the strategies. You don't have to actually present your annotated bibliography, but you present the information that.
I thought I did that in task 2.
Well, they're all built on each other, so
okay.
You probably have already done that.
Okay.
And you're just now taking the information that you found in task 3. And then you all are going through as a group and deciding which strategies you want to focus on. Okay? So that's where your annotated bibliography information comes in.
So I really don't have to sit down with them to present this week.
No.
Okay.
I think that's right, isn't it, Dr. Tillman? I don't see anywhere that it says you are to leave your PLC using the electronic narrated presentation, and that's for step 4. Actually, the information on task 3 was in last week's, and I always go back and make sure that I look at and see what it says, and you are to present and discuss the findings with your PLC, and you're to talk about it, and you will also talk about that as you're developing your action plan.
And don't you also have to, come up with a graphic organizer?
Yes.
to put all of that stuff together?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you do. So I had to go back to last week's agenda and double check what it says, because I take each one of these and split them up. But after you've worked with them as many years as Dr. Tillman and I have, then sometimes the tasks overlap, and what's exactly for each one sort of overlaps. And that's the reason I go back and do it one at a time and introduce you to them one at a time, and then go back to those notes. So Dr. Tillman, you want to add anything?
Well, I think the only problem that I see, and I'm not sure it's Ms. Burris's problem, but I see some papers that I'm working on now that you put entirely too much of 2 in 1, and you put entirely too much of 3 in 2, and you put entirely too much of 4 in 3. So it's, you may think that you're supposed to be doing it because you've already jumped the gun and done some stuff that doesn't belong in the paper at hand. And I'm constantly saying, from this point on should be in the next task, So I think that might be part of what you're doing. But always go back and read the rubric, because that's what that evaluator is looking for. Creativity is a wonderful thing, but don't do it here. This is your portfolio for licensure.
And they're looking for certain things.
They're looking to see that you know how to do certain things, and it's not be creative.
Did we answer your question?
I think so.
All right, just go back and look at last week's agenda, and it tells you exactly what has to be done in task 3. Because I went ahead and introduced task 4 tonight, so make sure you go back and look at last week's agenda.
Because we're supposed to be on 4th, right?
You're starting 4, yes, this week.
Okay.
4. Kelly,
Okay, so does that mean that task 3 is due in the APSL by the 30th?
all right, we're not worrying too much about the deadlines.
Okay, okay.
Just do as much as you can when you can, because with hurricane, everything is off a week. But at some point in time, we've got to get caught back up.
Right.
So just do the best you can, and if you can stay on with the original dates, that's what I'm doing. I'm staying with the original dates. Just know you have a week later that they're due. But, you know, do the best you can. Some people are not going to be able to even have them done by then, but because some of them are still not back in school.
Okay.
Some of them don't have a school to be back in.
At least one of your classmates doesn't even have a school to be in. So, you know, I think we all are going to have to be very lenient, and then just make sure you all communicate with your groups.
Thank you.
Yeah, you do your part, we'll do our part.
Okay, thank you.
I would say I'm meeting with you folks tomorrow, so look at it. Let's see what we can straighten out tomorrow, and we'll keep you going on your way.
And then it also looks like we are meeting with
Dr. Lamb
Dr. Lamb on Thursday.
on Thursday.
And that is, his topic of discussion is going to be task stream. And we really have chosen not to get into that because we knew he had certain things that he wanted to say, and we'll deal with that after he does his part.
Okay.
Okay?
And I think part of that also is that some of the CC1s just literally can't get to the schools. I mean, if there's no road, we can't get there. And so I think this will help that those of you that are getting to the point where you might need to be on task stream, this is going to help you, I think.
Okay.
All right. Anything else? Well, y'all have a great rest of the week.
Thank you. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.